Come on, Polly. You come out here. Kandra led his wife, still carrying Sonny, out to the living room. Faces were peering through the hospital window, and they heard Nick Cantrella shouting, "Let me through, damn it! Clear away from that door!" And he was in, latching the door from the street. He snapped the curtains shut with an angry yank. What in God's name happened? I was coming for that tissue culture, and now this? Don't worry about it, said Graham dryly, and with effort from the bed. Just a little useful murder. Hank Radcliffe, hero of the colony, gives his life to save the world from Big Bad Brenner. Sweet Jesus, he swore in awed delight. What a story! The killing of Hugo Brenner, an eyewitness account by Douglas Graham. Sweet Jesus! Didn't Brenner know who I was? Mimi started. I guess not, she realized. I never told him. You're plenty beat up, Tony pointed out. He wouldn't have recognized you. Hey, Nick, let's get those bodies out of here. Beat up is right, Graham chortled, and it was worth it. Thank you, my friends, whichever one of you, or how many was it, did the job on me. I thank you from the bottom of my poor old Gunther's heart, just to be able to lie here and listen to all that. I don't know who did it last time. Nick took one menacing step toward the bed. But by God, if you're starting on another of our yarns, I know who it's going to. Nick, wait a minute. You don't know what he's heard. Hey, Cantrella, I need a hand over here. I know who did it. Anna had to shout to make herself heard above Mimi and Tony, both talking at once. In the sudden silence, she said, Didn't I tell you, Tony? I guess it was while you were away that I found out. They did it. I think he was planning to hurt the baby, or they thought he was. They? The writer asked contemptuously. Brownies again? You're a good second-guesser, Miss Willendorf, but you missed out this time. The only designs I ever had on the Kandro kid were to get him back to Earth, where he could be properly cared for, instead of getting Marcaine dosed out to him to cover up for Mama. Listen, you lying crimp. Nick continued his arrested advance on Graham. If you think you're safe to turn out more of that kind of stuff just because you're laid up in bed, you better start thinking all over again. I've got no compunctions about kicking a rat when he's down. Nick, stop it! Swift and sure and deadly sharp, Mimi's voice came across the room like a harpoon. Give him a chance. You didn't hear what he heard, what Brenner said. I don't see how anybody could get a story against Sun Lake out of it. Thank you kindly, ma'am. Graham grinned painfully. Good to know somebody around here is still sane. Don't tell me you go for this brownie nonsense, too. I don't know, she said. If I'd heard it from anybody but Tony and Anna, I wouldn't believe a word of it. But they did get the baby back. Back from where? Tony realized for the first time that Graham didn't even know about Sonny's kidnapping, and the others, for that matter, still didn't know what had happened in the cave. Listen, he said. If you'll all take it easy for a few minutes, Anna and I have a lot to tell you. But first, Nick, help me move them to the living room floor. Anna, get blankets to cover them. Wait a minute. She went into the living room. All right, she called back a moment later, and Tony and Nick together carried what was left of Hank through the door. I wanted to get the Kandras out first, Anna explained, locking the front door again. They laid out Brenner's body next to Hank's and covered them both with blankets. The two men started back to the hospital, but Anna laid her hand on Tony's arm to stop him. Could I see you a minute? Of course. He let Nick go ahead and asked, worried, Ancy, darling, what's the matter? She closed the door firmly between them and the others in the hospital. Nick, we can't tell them, she said. Not now. Why not? They've got to know. Don't you see? We shouldn't have talked as much as we did. We shouldn't have said or done anything in front of Graham, but he doesn't believe it yet. If we convince him... Tony, the Brownies are terrified of people. They've kept away from people all along, for a reason. Don't you see? She asked urgently. Think what would happen to them. Think! I just got a flash from Graham's mind when I said they did it, before he decided to be skeptical. It was brutal. They'd be exterminated. He did see it. She was right. He thought of Hackenberg over at Pitco and Brownies being worked in the mines, native labor. He thought of what an Earth power would give to have the telepaths in its military intelligence. He thought of the horror and hatred people would feel for the mind-reading monsters. He thought of Brownies in zoos on dissecting tables. He thought of Sun Lake, still facing a charge of theft, of the difference it would make in Graham's story if he knew it wasn't Sun Lakers who attacked him. He thought of what the existence of the Brownies would mean to medical and biochemical research, and he made up his mind. Anna looked away with anger in her eyes, hopelessness, and set of her shoulders. "Why?" she begged. Tony, they're decent. Not like most people." "Because we know about them. That's why. Because you can't. You just can't keep a secret like that. Because it means too much to men, to all men, to mankind, or whatever part of it survives the end of Earth. Anna, Sun Lake may not be the answer to our future. The Brownies may be. Have you thought of that? They need us. They need to learn some of the things our civilization has to offer, and we need them. That piece of tissue I took from Sunny's lungs may mean the end of dependence on Earth's oxen. And that's just one first thing. There's no knowing how much we can learn, how they can help us to adapt, what new knowledge will come out of the contact. We can't keep it to ourselves. That's all there is to it." "There's no use arguing, is there?" "I'm afraid not," he said as gently as he could. He opened the door. "Are you coming back?" She hesitated, then followed. That's it. Tony wound up the narrative of their visit to the cave and then repeated, this time to Graham. "That's it. But I think you ought to know that Anna was trying to persuade me not to tell this story in front of you, to let you go on not believing in brownies. She was afraid of what people would do to them once it became known. I'm afraid, too. What you write will have a lot to do with it." He paused. "What are you going to write?" "I'm damned if I know." Graham tried to lift his head and decided against it. "It's either the most ingenious yarn I've ever heard. It covers every single accusation against you people, from Marcane theft to mayhem on my person, or it's the biggest story in the world. I'm damned if I know which." He relapsed into a thoughtful silence, broken suddenly by the roar of a large plane. An instant later there was the noise of a second, and then a third. One at a time they came closer and died out. "That would be Bell." Mimi stood up wearily. "I don't mind saying I'm confused. What do we do now?" "He's coming," Tony reminded her, "to help Mr. Graham. Perhaps we should leave it up to our guest to tell the commissioner whatever he sees fit." The writer was silent, stony-faced. "There's a slight matter of a couple of stiffs in the living room," Nick reminded them. "The commission might want to know about them. Strictly inter-colony stuff." "You know," Graham broke in suddenly, "if I was dumb enough to believe your story about brownies, and if your little experiment with the kid's lungs works, Sun Lake could get to be quite a place." "How do you mean?" Gracie asked. "The way Mr. Brenner had it figured, your lab is practically made to order from Marcane manufacture. And I gather you think you can turn out oxen, too, if that lung tissue is good. If there's anything behind all this brownie talk, well, you've got a deal that looks worth $1 trillion. You can supply oxen to all of Mars at what price? It wouldn't cost you anything compared to Earth import." He looked around the circle of astonished faces. "Don't tell me none of you even thought of that. Not even you?" He appealed to Mimi. She shook her head. "That's not the Sun Lake idea," she said stiffly. "We wouldn't be interested." Anna smiled very slightly, and there was a violent banging on the door. Tony went slowly through the living room. The door was beginning to shake under the blows. "Cut that out and I'll open it," he yelled. There was silence as he swung the door open. A sergeant of guards, 3 others, and Bell, who was well in rear. He must have known there'd been shooting. "What's been going on?" the commissioner began. He sniffed the air and his eyes traveled to the covered bodies. "Graham? If it is, we might have a murder arrest. His dispatch gave you people plenty of motive." "No, Brenner," Tony said shortly, "and a young man named Hank Radcliffe." Bell, starting for the figures, recoiled. "Sergeant," he said, and gestured. The non-com gingerly drew back the blankets, exposing the drug-maker's face. The commissioner stared for a long moment and said hoarsely, "Cover it, Sergeant." He turned to Tony. "What happened?" "We've had a disinterested witness," said the doctor. "Douglas Graham. He saw the whole thing." Tony led the way into the hospital. The sergeant followed, then the commissioner. Graham said from his bed, "Visiting a dead friend?" Bell snapped. "It's an inter-colony crime. Murder. Obviously, I can't take the word of anybody who's a member of this community. Did you witness the killing?" "I was a witness, all right," said Graham. "Best damn witness you ever saw. Billions of readers hang on my every word." He made an effort and raised himself on one elbow. "Remember the chummy sessions we used to have in Washington, Bell?" On the commissioner's forehead, sweat formed. "Here's the story of the killing," said Graham. "Brenner pulled his gun on a man named Candro during a little dispute. He threatened to kill Candro, went into some detail about how fully automatic the gun was, and, let me think, his exact words were, spray the room, with a babe in arms present. Think of it, Belle. Not even one of you would have done a thing like that, not even in the old days. The Radcliffe kid jumped Brenner and took all the slugs into his belly. I guess they were dum-dums, because the gun looked to me like a .35, and none of them went through. Only the Radcliffe boy squashed Brenner's neck before he knew he was dead. Reminded me of a time once in Asia. Belle cut him off. Did Brenner die right away? Did he say anything before he died? Deathbed confession? Delirious rambling? No. The commissioner relaxed perceptibly. But, said the newsman, he talked quite a bit before he pulled his gun. He didn't recognize me with my battered face, and I didn't introduce myself. He thought I was just a bunch of Sun Lakers in here, and nobody would believe a word they said about him. Brenner talked quite a bit. Sergeant, Belle broke in, I won't be needing you for a while. Wait for me in the other room, and see to it nobody touches those bodies. The door closed behind the non-com, and Graham laughed. Maybe you do know, eh, Commish? Maybe you know Brenner liked to refer to you as my man, Belle? The commissioner's eyes ran unhappily around the room. You people, he said. Get out, all of you. Leave us alone, so I can take a statement. No, said Graham. They stay here. I'm not a strong man these days, but Brenner talked quite a bit. I wouldn't want anything to stop me from getting the story to an eagerly waiting world. Belle looked around hopelessly. Tony saw Nick's face twist into a knowing, malevolent grin. Like the others, he made an effort to imitate it. What do you want, Graham? Asked the commissioner. What are you trying to get at? Not a thing, the writer said blandly. By the way, in my statement on the killing, I should include what Brenner had to say about you. He mentioned some financial matters, too. Would they be relevant? Tony tried to remember what financial matters Brenner had discussed, aside from the price he offered for the colony. None. But Graham was a shrewd bluffer. The commissioner made a last effort to pull himself together. You can't intimidate me, Gran, he rasped. And don't think I can't be tough if you force my hand. I'm in the clear. I don't care what Brenner said. I haven't done a thing. Yet, said the writer succinctly. Your part was to come later, wasn't it? Belle's face seemed to collapse. Still think you can get tough? Graham jeered. Try it, and I guarantee that you'll be hauled back to Earth on the next rocket to be tried for malfeasance, exceeding your authority, accepting bribes, and violating the narcotics code. I can also guarantee that you will be convicted and imprisoned for the rest of your life. Don't try to bluff me, you tin-horn sport. I've been bluffed by experts. The commissioner began shrilly. I won't stand for it, and cracked. For God's sake, Graham, be reasonable. What have I ever done to you? What do you want? Tell me what you want. The writer fell back on the bed. Nothing right now, thanks. If I think of anything, I'll let you know. The commissioner started to speak, and couldn't. Tony saw the veins of tension stand out. He saw, too, how Anna's lip was curling in disgust. Graham seemed amused. There is one thing, Commish. An inter-colony matter under your jurisdiction, I believe. Will you remove those carcasses on your way out? You'd be surprised how sensitive I am about such things. He closed his eyes and waited till the door was shut behind the departing guest. When he opened them again, all the self-assurance was gone out of him. Doc, he moaned, give me a shot. When I got up on my elbow, something tore. God, it hurts. While Tony took care of him, Joe Gracie said, It was a grand performance, Mr. Graham. Thank you for what you did. I can undo it, the writer said flatly. Or I can use it in any way I want to. If you people have been lying to me. He sighed with relief. Thanks, Doc. That's a help. Now, if you want anything out of my man, Belle, show me one of your brownies.